Welcome to Culture Meets Crypto, a podcast that highlights people in crypto who are pioneers in their realms: art, gaming, music, and computer science. They are doing things the decentralized way, the hard way, and most often are breaking norms. They're happy to stand alone to build something that will change the internet as we know it, and their goal is less about making money in the short term and more about changing the world.
Welcome back to Culture Meets Crypto with my co-host Evan Castelli. We're very excited to have Jeff Davis here today, who has a long history as a traditional artist in various mediums and has worked in galleries across the world, the Torrance Art Museum, the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena, Fort Collins Museum of Contemporary Art. He is also the Chief Creative Officer of ArtBlocks, which many people in crypto are very familiar with. He's minted 7 collections, and correct me if that's incorrect. And he's the founder of the Davis Editions. So we're going to be asking him all about that. But I remember, and I should point out that here in the corner, Evan and I have our logo, which you created back when we started the company in 2018. And we are so appreciative of that. And it took over a year for me to settle on a logo. So surprisingly, but it was really important to me. And I love your artwork. And I remember studying some of the things I found on the internet of your sculptures and various mediums that you've worked in. And so I'd love to just hear your story as an artist, like what, the backstory, I guess, as an artist before NFTs.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I mean, you Angie, kind of discovered my artwork in the NFT space pretty early on when I was doing work on Super Rare. And so the Signum logo is based on an algorithm that I did, literally called Logos. It was I did a handful of them on Super Rare very early on, and made a custom one for you all that looks like an S. Shape somewhat, but so it's been fun to to work on that with you.
And it came out, and remember when you did it and you didn't know that it was going to look like an S, and you just said, I'm going to try something.
So I took the logo algorithm that I'd used to run the other outputs, and we kind of settled in on the color. So I adjusted the algorithm and said, okay, we want it to be sort of this light blue color, and I literally hit run, and the first one that came out, I was going to run a bunch and sort of curate, say, here's 5 or 6 options, whatever. And the first one I hit was this one. I was like, this is perfect. It looks like an S. It's like, I'm not even going to run any additional outputs. So it's kind of kismet. That was kind of fun. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I've been an artist for, like 25, I hate saying these numbers out loud, 25 years or so professionally. My background is in traditional fine art. I have an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in painting and drawing. My practice early on was based in painting and printmaking. I've always done very geometric, sort of mathematically based work, but I would execute them as paintings or as traditional prints, silk screens, things of that nature. And then I started discovering computers, and I was using them initially more as like, I guess sort of as like a prototyping or sort of like sketching tool. So I would use computers to like draw out really rigid geometric sorts of compositions. And I'd be like, okay, this is the thing I want to do. And then I would make a painting of it. I'd get out the masking tape and all those things. And partially because this was, kind of late 90s, late 1990s, printing technology wasn't fantastic. And I didn't, the things that I could create from a computer that were physical, at least, didn't feel like high enough quality to call them works of art. I didn't feel like at the time. So I was kind of using it as a tool to sort of like figure out my ideas, and then I would make them in paint. But eventually printing technology kind of caught up. And then I started changing from doing kind of traditional media to creating digital prints of my work. And so I still wasn't working algorithmically or generatively at the time. I was still kind of like predetermining what my compositions would be, sort of draw them out digitally, but hand draw them on a computer. and then create prints. And I was working in series a lot, and so I'd make related works that were similar to one another. And then I started my family with my wife, and I had a little bit of a pause where kind of my priorities shifted, and was spending a lot less time making art and focusing more time on my young children. And so I had a kind of period of a few years where I sort of just took a break from making art. And when I came back, I kind of, kids got a little older, got them into different childcare situations, school. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna kind of get back into art. And I found that I was really stuck conceptually. Like I couldn't sort of restart my prior practice. Like I was having a hard time kind of coming up with new ideas in the same vein that I was working previously. And so I started exploring randomization in my artwork. So like, okay, well, instead of making decisions, why don't I let some randomness in to help kind of just help with my decision-making in terms of like creating artwork. And so at the time I was making, I was still, again, working, hand drawing these things digitally to make prints. But I was creating big Excel spreadsheets of like randomized data that would like do all the decision making for me. So create a rectangle with this width and this height and position it at this location in the composition and make it this color. And then I'd have a table of all these decisions, and then I would hand draw, whatever the randomized table of data was telling me. And so that was really interesting. And so I kind of worked that way for about a year. And then then I realized I wanted to kind of work more rapidly. It was very tedious to like do all this translation from Excel to hand drawing. And that's when I discovered processing. I just realized there must be some way to automate the drawing part of the randomization I was doing. And so I started learning processing, which was my first kind of foray into true generative art, creative coding. And so that was like in 2010. So I've been kind of working this way for, 10, 12 years now. And so then I was doing generative work. And so still as a printmaker though, I still thought of myself as a like digital printmaker. So I'd create algorithms, I'd run a bunch of output from them. I'd select the ones that I think were the strongest, and then I'd make a body of a series of prints, and then try to go stage those in an exhibition setting, kind of in the same way that you would with any sort of physical artwork. And so, yeah, I worked that way for a number of years. And then in 2019, I started looking into NFTs. I had a Twitter account that I didn't really use. I was mostly on Instagram, but kind of checked in on Twitter from time to time. And then at some point, I think both Super Rare and Known Origin started following me on Twitter. I had no idea what they were, and I didn't have a very active Twitter presence, so I noticed when people followed me, I'd be like, oh, I should go check out what that is.
I was in the
and
same
so.
boat.
Yeah. And so I looked into both of those, and I was like, this is really interesting. Like, this is a platform for digital art where the artwork itself is in a native digital state and is bought or sold, in these marketplaces. And so that was really intriguing to me, that there could be a way to work digitally without that final step that I was doing, where I was creating prints and then finding physical locations to say put them up and make them available for sale, that you could kind of get to the digital part of it, and then that's actually it. That's the final kind of output of your process. I knew nothing about crypto at all. I probably knew what Bitcoin was just from the news, but that was the extent of my knowledge at that point. So I kind of dug into their help docs and sort of tried to like figure it out. I bought $40 worth of Ethereum on Coinbase, set up a MetaMask wallet, transferred over. I used that to mint, my first projects on Super Rare. And then it was just really just kind of a fun experiment. It was pretty early. There were still plenty of people working, on the platform, like Xcopy and Coldy and a lot of other artists kind of there that are much more recognizable today. But Yeah, so I just minted my first handful of pieces and just see what happened. They were bought by other artists on the platform. And for, at the time, like I recently looked back at my super rare history. The first, my first sale was for I think 0.1 ETH, which sounds like, hey, that's pretty good. But Ethereum was not worth anything what it is today. And so it was literally a $19 transaction, my first art sale. So I really wasn't in it for like thinking like I'm gonna get rich or whatever, doing NFTs. It was just this idea that like, this is really, really interesting that I can sell my work as a digital asset versus like a physical thing. So yeah, I sold a few, collected a little bit more ETH to mint my next few, and that's just kind of how I operated. Just sort of parlayed, my initial sales into creating new works. And so it was just really experimentation. I was still working my traditional way I had been previously and still mounting exhibitions and making prints and that sort of thing. And then in 2020, I just sort of like decided like, I'm really, really interested in this. And so I'm going to kind of just dive in, like I'm going to really make a concerted effort and just do, I guess at the time what I was doing is I was taking existing algorithms that I was already doing other things with, and I'd kind of run sort of like an extension set of them, and then I'd mint those. So they were still unique, but I wasn't like building unique projects just for the cryptos, for the NFTs. I was just kind of taking other things I was doing and sort of like, oh, I'll make a few more extras and mint those. And then in 2020, I was like, I'm gonna really just kind of like go for it and just kind of see what happens. And so I created my first specific generative project on super rare. It's called Abstract Token. And it was a series of 40 pieces that I minted there over the course of a couple months, because there was, at least at the time, I don't know how it operates now, there was a quota to like how much you could upload like in a week. They didn't want people sort of like overloading the system, which I totally understand, but working generatively, my work makes more sense when you have it all together, right? As a series of work versus individual pieces. So I was trying to like get it going, get it up. So, but it took, several weeks to get it kind of up and running. But I actually had a lot of success, with that series, and that really sort of like solidified, my feeling like, okay, this is a really interesting place that I want to continue to work. So that was kind of, 2020s, through the course of the year. And that was it was really exciting. It just kind of felt like a new frontier. I had lots of different opportunities start opening up from different places. And I was just kind of like, I'm going to do everything. I'll try it all, like I'm not going to like create any boundaries for myself. I did a project with async art.
I bought your master on that.
Yes. One. Yeah. So that was a really fun project that I really enjoyed doing, kind of a sort of a generative project, not generative, but I took essentially what would have been a generative project, but instead of creating random variants of it, it's user controlled. So the user can control the same parameters that it would have been as a generative project. And so, so I was just doing a lot of experimenting. And then later, probably September of 2020, is when I got an email from Eric Calderon, founder of ArtBlocks. The platform didn't exist at the time, and he was just sort of reaching out to generative artists that were doing things with NFTs or in the space, or maybe not even doing things with NFTs, but he reached out to me, had discovered my work on one of the platforms and said, hey, I'm building this thing called ArtBlocks. I think your work would be a great fit for the platform. Are you interested? And like I said, I was just kind of like,
we're doing
that
everything.
Sounds cool.
Yeah,
I'm doing everything. So let's go for it. And I had, when I tell the story, I described the process that I had to go through on super rare in terms of like, I was generating all the work locally, and then I was uploading one at a time over a period of time to kind of build out the full series of the project. And I remember, and at the time also I was talking about Twitter, I part of my jump into Web3 was like, okay, well, I just got to get active on Twitter too, and kind of like figure out who to follow and start having conversations with people. So I really got heavy into Twitter in 2020. But I remember having a dialogue with somebody on Twitter, kind of like, man, wouldn't it be great if instead of having to like generate these outputs as images and upload them and create NFTs out of them, like, it just makes sense that I could just put my project, online and just have people generate the work themselves, and it would create NFTs. And I described it as this art vending machine concept. You create the vending machine instead, and then you let people sort of purchase art from it. And then that was prior to Eric contacting me. Eric contacts me, and I was like, he describes ArtBlocks, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is, I just described this concept to somebody, and you're actually doing it, you're building it. And I really like this idea. So it was the idea of putting your generative script online and then having NFTs generated in real time based on the purchase transaction.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I want to get to that, to ArtBlocks, and I know Evan really wants to dig into that as well. But before we go to that, I would love to hear. So, have you ever heard of an artist called John Higley? I meant to ask you this a while back, but anyway, he sadly passed away. But I really got into his geometric art. I met him in New York City. He was just a wonderful person. And he would do what you described of taping off and painting these, formulas, basically. And I wondered, did you have a passion for math or these formulas? Like, how did that? What was the seed, I guess, that got you excited about that kind of art? It's a very specific and kind of different kind of art.
Yeah, for sure. So yes, I have a background in math. So when I went to, I kind of always did childhood. I didn't do anything artistically. I probably consider myself to be a creative person, but I never like made art or took art classes or anything like that. I was always very good at math. When I went to undergrad, I was initially pursuing a math and physics double major. Okay. I dropped the physics part. I didn't enjoy that as much. I really liked kind of the pureness, I guess, of the math that I was studying. But I went to a small liberal arts school in Wisconsin, Lawrence University. And so in addition to whatever you thought your major was going to be when you started, you had core liberal arts requirements that you had to fulfill across the entire curriculum, across the entire school. So I had to fulfill a humanities credit, and I took an intro to studio art class my sophomore year as an undergraduate. It's the first art class I'd ever taken. And I really, really liked it. And so I was like, I'm gonna take another one. And I took another art class. And then by the end of my sophomore year, kind of heading into junior, I was trying to figure out how to add an art major on top of my math major. So I graduated with a dual math and studio art major as an undergraduate. Yeah. So, the math has always been there. Yeah. And I think that's why when I eventually did go to kind of teach myself coding, kind of at that point in my artistic career, it did come somewhat naturally to me. I do kind of think, I have a background in logic, and, so it was something I was able to sort of pick up, and figure out how to use that as a tool, later.
Yeah,
so,
I love the concept, because I think that there's actually, there are very few artists that I think maybe think they're wired that way, but I do think that there's this Venn diagram of math and art, and I'm the same way. I've always seen beauty in numbers, and especially numbers that repeat and patterns of numbers, and that's how I got into geometry art back before I met you. But and I just wondered if you did have a math background.
Yeah, definitely. And I think music is has a big math connection too. So I think that's another place that people sort of overlook the fact that there's still this kind of idea of structure and proportion and logic, and that there's rules at work, that kind of are the foundation of your decision-making process. And so that's kind of how I think my art is, but I think generally music kind of operates that way in a lot of ways too. So yeah, I don't see them as like distinct, things that are separate from each other.
Makes sense.
I gotta ask. I took art classes all through high school. I went to art school for industrial design. I'm really curious if you had any hesitance or resistance towards making solely digital art or selling solely digital art, because something that was kind of preached to me in high school, not so much in college, was that using technology was a bit of a cop out in fine art, or that like you shouldn't be using your iPad instead of painting because it's easier. You should be using the old methods or that kind of thing. Did you ever face, or do you face any? Do you think the NFT space has any critics that still have that older mindset where technology is the easy way out or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changing. I didn't personally have any sort of hesitancy or concerns. I mean, I definitely have been, particularly because, coming at it from sort of a math, logical, numeric standpoint, as computers worked as a tool for me for math stuff, it made perfect sense to me that they would make sense to use them as a tool for art making. But for sure, I would say throughout my career as an artist, I did generally feel like an outsider because of the work I was doing, because it was digitally derived, whether it was, I don't know. I relay this kind of, I would, so I go through this process, let's say like, I'd create an algorithm, create a bunch of outputs. I'd create prints, like really nice looking, high quality prints of those outputs. I'd put them up in a gallery space, have a show of, 20 related works of art from a series. And then people would come in, we have an opening, people would come in and look at it, and everybody would call them paintings. Yeah, like just regardless, like I wouldn't provide a whole lot of context about what I was doing. Just people would just react to what they were seeing on the walls. Like, oh, I really love your paintings, and it's just, and so I actually wasn't like enforcing that part of my practice. Like it was a turnoff generally for me to go, well, what I did was I created a computer program that created all these works, and then they were digitally printed, on this frame. Like, then to your point, people would have been like, oh, or either I don't get it or think lesser of it or whatever. They didn't look like paintings, but just kind of, that's how people sort of associated that these things are still fine art. And so, but generally, yeah, when I was, being someone through the last, 25 years using digital tools but operating kind of inside of a kind of a mainstream contemporary art kind of sphere, yeah, I definitely felt like, it was much harder for people to kind of accept like what I was doing or understand it. Maybe acceptance isn't the right word, but just sort of like understand it or appreciate it. There just wasn't really a market for it. And so, but I feel it's just that in where I sit today, that feels like it's rapidly changing landscape, like just over the last couple of years, that now all of a sudden, definitely. Like there's, and I think NFTs have been powering that to some degree. It's become this amazing platform for generative art specifically. And so there's a new dialogue happening, and it's expanding out, I think, out beyond the NFT space about digital art, generative art, that, yeah, these actually are valid tools for art making. They have been, people have been working this way for a long time. So I'm not trying to say like this is a new thing, but I do think there's a growing kind of acknowledgement or acceptance of these are all fantastic tools for making art with. So
I just have one more quick question, and then I'm going to turn it to Evan on ArtBlocks. But you mentioned the early artists in the space, Xcopy, Coldy, et cetera, a lot of money, Josie.
Yeah.
Were there any other artists like you who did the same kind of art?
A little bit. So one of my first purchases was by an artist that goes by Art Plus Brad. And he was there when I got there, and he does generative work and was kind of doing similar things where he would create generative systems. He's actually, I guess I shouldn't say he, I'm not, just the artist is, has now deployed a project on ArtBlocks, Ode to Roy, actually two projects, Ode to Roy, and I can't remember the last one, but so it's kind of been fun. So like that was my first purchase, and kind of one of the first person I was sort of engaged with was doing somewhat similar work. and now it's kind of come, full circle.
Full circle.
Yeah, they're they're on ArtBlocks.
But now
too,
I bet there is you basically ignited a whole probably slew of digital artists and that have the same kind of algorithmic basis, especially with ArtBlocks. But I'm going to turn it over to Evan, to ask more questions about that.
Yeah, so Jeff, you kind of talked about how you and Snowfro or Eric Calderon met and how you were both thinking of that idea of an NFT vending machine. How'd you become the chief creative officer? And kind of, I want to know what that role entails, whether you help selecting artists, curating artists, coming up with the partnerships, etc.
Yeah, all of those things. So I guess to back up then. So Eric reached out to me late 2020, and I think he had been reaching out to a bunch of artists at the time, just trying to kind of deciding to make a concerted effort to actually launch ArtBlocks as a platform, leading a handful of artists, sort of for launch day projects. And so I worked on a kind of porting an existing project, but making it sort of compatible, for the ArtBlocks framework. And then we ended up launching the platform on Black Friday of 2021, so November, whatever date that was. And I was kind of the only external artist that sort of followed up with him and got a project ready. And so on opening day, it was Chromie Squiggle, which is Eric's project, Genesis, which is a project by his brother Dan, and then my project, Construction Token. And so, we had no expectations. We just kind of put our projects online, turned it on, went live. And just people sort of poured in, and my project sold out in 2 hours, and then Genesis sold out, shortly after that. And then Chromie Squiggle was, those projects were around 500 outputs each. And then Chromie Squiggle was a 10,000 output project. I'm sure it did equivalent sales, but that project was open for quite a long time because of its size. But so we just had a really successful launch day, and sort of kind of really quickly after that, I just really thought this was, I thought it was just really, really cool. And I was kind of in a position in my life where I had been doing some entrepreneurial things on my own. I taught in higher education for 20 years. I taught art. I had sort of a year or two prior to the launch of ArtBlocks had left that behind and was doing some entrepreneurial things on my own anyway. So I was self-employed kind of when this was all kind of coming together. And so I just saw this and I was just like, this is really cool. I just want to be involved. So I just basically started bugging Eric. I was just like, hey, if you ever are going to kind of turn this into a company, into a full-time thing, whatever, I want to help you build ArtBlocks. And so, so that's kind of how it started. I ended up being the first employee when ArtBlocks was incorporated in April of 2021. And so Eric and I were just sort of like, well, what should your role be? And I had been doing some consulting for him, for ArtBlocks prior to that. And kind of my pitch was like, look, with my background experience, I can manage the whole art side of the house. I have experience working with artists. I know how the projects work, having deployed one myself. I've been teaching for 20 years. I can evaluate artwork. I just have that background. And if I did that for ArtBlocks, Eric, you could sort of, lead business and tech sort of part of the house, and we can sort of divide and conquer that way. So that was kind of my pitch. And so I started consulting, and then that's how I became chief creative officer, basically, when ArtBlocks was formed. Just sort of like, I'll run the art ArtBlocks, and we can start, you can focus on the other parts of the business. And so that's where I started. And so that was a little over a year ago. And as we've grown, that's just always been my charter. Like, I will just be responsible for the art on the platform and everything that entails. So it involves not me personally, but like how we decide on what projects to have on the platform, how we review them, relationships with artists, yeah, things of that nature. So
and there's three categories, right?
Yes. Yeah.
There's
So
three,
right now,
curated, playground, and factory. So I assume you help select the curated, and then playground is an extension of curated artists who have been selected, and then factory is sort of anyone who's kind of been under review who can min projects, correct?
yeah. So curated, actually, I am actually not involved with that. We have an independent board of curators who review projects. They're professionals from the art world, crypto, NFT collectors, design backgrounds, curators. It's a wide group of different backgrounds of individuals. But so that board of individuals reviews all the projects in the ArtBlocks pipeline, and they're the ones designating which ones they think should sit in the curated collection. So more what's happening now, I guess, in terms of internally with my team is more on the front end. Just we receive, at any point in time, we have 300 applications from artists that would like to be on ArtBlocks. And so our work is going through those applications and sort of sorting through which ones, which projects and which artists are good fits for ArtBlocks, and sort of initially advancing them into our ecosystem. And then the curation board takes that set of projects and sort of decides which ones should be given curated status. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yep, that does. I mean, you've really, or the ArtBlocks has really only been minting projects for a year or so, or a year and a half or so, correct? So how have you seen those projects evolve? And I guess I'm curious what you think of generative art as a whole and where you think that medium is going.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually the most fun part of my job, is just sort of seeing this, like, what feels to me like a trajectory of just like continuing growth and exploration in terms of generative art. There has always been, like, there's been sort of an online community of generative artists, like before NFTs, that had all been sort of working together, sharing information, sharing artwork, building on each other's things. And, that was all very exciting, but it was just not, it wasn't, to be, I guess, blunt about it, it wasn't monetized, right? It was just sort of an online sharing community, but they're doing all very amazing things. And so I think what's been really interesting is, seeing a good deal of that community move to ArtBlocks and turn what they were doing into careers, as artists. But so, yeah, it's been just fun. Like, it's just so fun to see, like, okay, here's where we are. And then I don't know, there's kind of like this sort of hold my beer, sort of mentality, whatever that meme is, but it's like, whatever just came out, like the next artist, like, oh, okay, well, hey, how about this? And so it's not like a, like competitive, or you're trying to like be better than someone, but it's like, you see something great, you're inspired to do something you think is even greater, right? And so there's kind of been this like building over time. And so the projects are getting more complex, more, just more going on, and people are finding new areas to explore, in terms of what generative art can be. And like, it doesn't have to be, as someone who works very geometrically, and mathematically, that is a very natural fit for people that do generative art, but generative art doesn't have to be that. And so when we start seeing things that look like applications of fine art or things in nature, or, it just gets really exciting when people start finding new ways to kind of use these tools to create different kinds of outputs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give us one to take a look at that might surprise us, because I have to admit, my assumption was that they would kind of look and feel like algorithmically generated or mathematically based. Give us a couple of interesting nuances.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, there's an interesting trend where for some generative projects to try to mimic things that are done through traditional media in art. And it's really, it's just fascinating. I think it's so interesting. So like to try to create a generative algorithm that looks like a hand-drawn drawing or an actual painting. And so I don't know, like a recent one I would say is a project called Sotheby. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, by Melissa Wiederach. It looks like a calligraphic line drawing with water spilled on it, and then the ink kind of bleeds out on the paper and it has a paper texture. So they just literally look like they're things that were made with water media and paper, but it's computer code creating these things. And so that's really interesting. One that's somewhat recent, but just kind of when we were talking about sort of like going into new territory or kind of breaking through boundaries is Chimera by MP Cause. Like, I remember when I was kind of first seeing that project, I was like, I have no idea how this is being achieved, in an algorithm. And so there are these, they look like kind of Van Gogh or Monet style like paintings in terms of like choppy brush marks, but they're three-dimensional and animated at the same time. So it brings in that sort of like computer sort of element in the same time. And they're just something like, so that, I think that's, to me, that's a really good example of like one of those sort of like, oh, this is blowing my mind, sort of like situations for like people really upping their game in terms of like what's starting to come out of ArtBlocks. So those would be just two. I mean, I love everything on the platform, so I could, it's hard for me to pick favorites, but yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hate to ask you to pick favorites, and I'm sure you're supportive of all the artists, but it is really cool to see just completely new formats coming out of NFTs, and so that's exciting. We'll check that one out. I've been dying to talk to you about this concept. We had a brainstorm at NFT NYC with investors and several kind of gaming NFT oriented companies, media oriented companies, music oriented companies. And we've been really wrestling with this idea of IP rights. And we've been wondering if in the NFT context, the only way to avoid infringing on IP rights for established artists or existing art is to use generative art. We saw this example, I don't know if you've seen Async Art's blueprints, where they have the music that's, it's a clip. It takes a clip of music and algorithmically generates something new with the sound of the song. And then a piece of art overlays it. And we were just brainstorming this idea of how cool it would be to have something like that be either a ticket into a concert that you have as a souvenir, or merch on the way out of a actually in real life concert. But anyway, we've been discussing and debating this idea of IP rights and whether algorithmically generated art is really the only way to avoid future challenges on that. And I'd love your perspective.
Yeah. I don't know if I have like opinions just in terms of on the legal side of things, but I guess what I would lean into in terms of what you're talking about is that we at ArtBlocks are definitely thinking of what generative content looks like outside of the realm of art. Being a platform for generative art for the sake of being art is always going to be sort of our flagship, sort of like, our North Star in terms of what we do. But as a company, we think that the technology, the platform that's been developed, and this idea of generatively creating unique content on demand has interesting applications in a lot of other areas. And you touched on a whole bunch of them in your initial list, Angie. So like, gaming is a huge one, fashion, design, sports, or memorabilia kinds of things. And so we're working on a product called ArtBlocks Engine, which is essentially an enterprise version of ArtBlocks that we can work with partners who want to create generative content for whatever applications they're interested in doing that. We basically are creating a platform for that. And so there's all sorts of different directions that, that can go. So yeah, so we're definitely thinking, along those lines, that I think what you're touching on, like, yeah, we've always talked about like generative tickets or generative souvenirs, from visiting something in real life and getting something, but each thing that you get, or generative t-shirts, or like you kind of mentioned, like this idea, there has to be a whole sort of like, for those sorts of things, if they're going to be physical items like a t-shirt, the production capabilities of creating on-demand, unique, one-of-one things needs to be there. So there's some, we might be slightly ahead of physical technologies that would facilitate some of these things, but we're definitely thinking about it, and a lot of, I think, that technology is coming along too. So just in terms of like laser printing and like computer controlled CNC routers, or whatever, that you can create unique things from a computer, model or something like that. So
yeah, it's I really am excited about this area specifically because back in 2018, one of the first blog posts that I wrote was I don't remember the title, or the mantra was, I want to take my Gucci bag from the holiday party to the Mario party. And the idea was that I could see branded items that provide social capital and identity, being carried into online spaces, like in gaming, in the same way that, gamers have been buying, selling, trading skins, which are, again, social capital and identity in a game. But then what we've found is actually that wasn't the thing that was the most coveted or interesting by users or consumers. It was really the look and feel of the thing. So, Mythical had the first luxury drop inside a game, and it was this character, Sharky B. It was a Burberry collab, and on my original, thought process, it would have been a trench coat. Burberry trench coat that you can buy just in the online space and put it on your character. But that wasn't actually as attractive or as coveted or demanded as a character that just had this look and feel of Burberry, with floaties on its arm and pool shoes, so something totally different, but with the look and feel, which made me think, wow, algorithmically generated art could kind of get there, and then also not infringe potentially on some of those rights holders.
Right. So or to your point, so it's like like let's say Gucci, like instead of like, what if your Gucci handbag was the only one of that Gucci handbag that existed, and your next door neighbor also bought the same Gucci handbag, but it was different, it was unique to that person. And so that's what's interesting to us, is that we have the ability, that's what's really compelling about generative art, is that you have a project or a series of pieces that all come from the same home algorithm. So they're all related in some fashion, but every single one of those is unique. And then it creates a community around that project, because now you have, let's say 500 people, if that's what the project size was, that all have a unique piece that are all their own personal, this is my piece of this project, and it's different from everybody else's, but it's part of this larger, system of related items. And so now I have a connection to everybody else who's part of this project, but I still have a unique piece of it. And so that idea of like, you can apply that to fashion in a very easy way. I didn't touch on gaming, but that's another, clearly, like why, and that's seems to me a much lower hanging fruit, because it's already digital in the first place. Like, if I have some loot or a skin or something like that, why is the thing that I have, why does it need to be the same as everybody else's? Why don't I get a unique variant of that weapon, of that hat, digital hat, or whatever? Like, there's no reason there needs to be like duplicates. We can put generative algorithms in place and all those things, and every single one can be unique.
And they could still be part of a set. I think that one of a set is more valuable sometimes than one of one, but one of a set where each one is still unique. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
That's
exactly. So it's like, it's not quite personalization, but it's like
interesting.
everyone is unique. And so yours is especially your own because you generated it and you now own it. And you can, if it's an NFT, hopefully underneath, you can buy, sell, trade it, move it around from platform to platform. So, but the idea that you don't need to like create 1,000 duplicates of the same item digitally, there's no need for that actually. Everyone could be unique within a set. Yeah. So we think there's a lot. We think there's a lot of promise there, and so we're starting to explore different industries, different verticals where sort of our technology might make sense to kind of do those.
How many people are you now? I know you've grown quite a bit.
We just got up to about 40. We're about 40 employees now. Yeah.
Nice.
So mostly engineers. That's our biggest division at ArtBlocks, software engineers. Then we have an art department. We're shaping up a marketing department, and then operations department, which is kind of also has our business development, which is kind of what we're talking about here. That's sort of our ArtBlocks engine product.
So on that note of partnerships, ArtBlocks just had a pretty huge one with Pace Gallery.
Yes.
Which that means that you guys are basically going to be tapping into their 60 years of collector base, plus they're going to be able to tap into your tech base. I mean, I think they announced an NFT platform last year or so called Pace Verso, but I'd love to hear kind of how you guys got in touch with Pace, how that collaboration came to be, and maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what's going to happen in the future with it. I know there's probably some legal stuff you can't talk about, but that'd be really interesting.
I can just talk about the relationship for sure. So early on, Eric had been having conversations with Mark Klimcher, who's the CEO of Pace, Pace Galleries. They just started forming a relationship around generative art, not specifically NFTs, but just around generative art and digital art. And they've always shown in like interests, kind of that these are interesting tools for artists versus a lot of it's changed. It feels like it's changing more now, but early on in the space that there was definitely sort of a defensive posture, I'd say, from the mainstream contemporary art world towards what was happening in NFTs. It's all garbage, it's a fad, that sort of thing. And it's changing more to like a curiosity or just, trying to, in my sense, it's just sort of like outsider, sort of looking in, but it's changing more towards like a curiosity and trying to understand, okay, this isn't going away. We should try to understand it and see where we fit or where the connections are, things like that. But Pace very early on was kind of like interested in, which is, you mentioned Pace Verso. They were one of the first, major galleries to come out and sort of embrace like, hey, we're going to try to figure out NFTs. We're going to figure out if there's a mechanism here for our artists, as a tool. That's, I think it's just the best way to think of it. It doesn't need to be one, it's not binary. It's just, this is a different path for certain kinds of artists doing certain kinds of work. And it's an interesting tool for them to have. So anyway, it kind of became more formalized. I'd say, like, I guess I don't know what time I'm losing. It's crypto, right? So who knows how long ago things were. But this was, I guess, the end of last year. We started working with Leo Villarreal on a project at ArtBlocks. And this was actually sort of independent of Pace. He's an artist on the Pace roster, but we had sort of made connections with him just independently and started working just on a ArtBlocks project with him, which ended up being a curated release. And then, Pace ended up, supporting the project. They were happy that we had made this connection and released this project. They bought a bunch of the Cosmic Reef is the name of the project on secondary. Pace Gallery did, and they showed them in their booth at Frieze LA. So, Pace goes to all the major contemporary art fairs and has a booth where they put up their wares. They actually bought Cosmic Reef ArtBlocks NFTs and put them on display in their fair booth at Freeze LA. And that was actually a really big kind of moment for us, sort of internal, like this is a really big deal. We have ArtBlocks at a major contemporary art fair through Pace. They all sold out of the booth. I mean, people came and were curious and bought them. And Eric and I had gone to Freeze LA to see the installation and kind of talk to the team. And that's really where the seeds of like this idea of like, should we actually have a formal partnership, between Pace and ArtBlocks, kind of thinking about what just happened, basically, right? So they were showing ArtBlocks artwork at a contemporary, major contemporary art fair. That's the kind of, we would like to expand into these sorts of spaces at ArtBlocks and be part of that dialogue. We just strictly because of like, we think generative art is a compelling art form, particularly of our time. And so as much as we can get it on the same stage and in the same places where conversations around other contemporary art forms are happening, that's really important to us. And then conversely, Pace was very interested in trying to navigate the Web3 landscape. They had been starting to do that with Verso. They identified ArtBlocks as being a high quality player in the Web3 space. And so they were very interested in having, trying to get to work their artists to have projects released on our platform. So it's very much a, sort of a win-win, each side finding unique benefits that the other side was bringing to the table that we wouldn't necessarily have, on our own. Yeah, so we kind of formalized what that would look like. We got the initial project sort of underway before we announced anything, and that was John Gerard's Petro National project. So we started kind of the groundwork on that and working with him to develop that project and get it ready for ArtBlocks. And then when that was ready, then we announced the formal partnership. We previewed it at Art Basel, at Basel, Switzerland, Art Basel, with them, and launched it to great success. And so now we're hitting the ground running and thinking about future projects and future places where we'll be kind of exhibiting these works. And so, yeah, it's been a great partnership and a great relationship.
It's really cool to see the different worlds overlap, just because when Pace Verso launched, I heard nothing about it and like on crypto Twitter and the NFT worlds. But when ArtBlocks partnered with Pace, I heard a lot about that. And I'm still hearing a lot about that. So it's just funny to see how those worlds are converging right now.
Yeah, and it's like we're amplifying, their Web3 efforts through ArtBlocks, and there's been an excitement in terms of like, we took a lot of care in terms of like get we were trying to sort of position the collaboration and partnership relative to what we were already doing on ArtBlocks and trying to get the right structure in place. We think we landed on a pretty good place where we sort of have this new collaborative area inside of ArtBlocks for these kinds of partnerships. And so it's on our, it's alongside of our normal core offerings that we do with more native generative artists, the kind of things we've been championing all along. But it also provides sort of a unique space for us to work with Pace, directly in terms of like working with their artists roster to put out projects. But yeah, it's been great. Yeah, it's kind of, we're both getting very unique exposure from the other side of the equation that we're both finding beneficial and interesting. So.
That's really exciting. Our core businesses are really, one side of the house for advisors and advise companies in the space, and then we also invest and organize funding rounds. But a third area that we're excited to explore, really kind of pro bono, just to kind of help illuminate some of the new artists and artists in general in the space, is through we've reached out to a couple of museums, the MoMA, ICA in Boston, Evans in Boston, he was at Mass Art. And I'm just wondering, if there's ways we can collaborate in the future, we'd love to do that, because, it seems like Pace could just be one of many that you could be working with. It's not exclusive, is it?
No, yeah. I mean, they're definitely, they came to us early, and there's definitely a sort of, I would say, first mover advantage here, right? So we're happy to give them space and work out the next sets of projects with them. We're not in any hurry to sort of like fill out, what this collaborative portfolio might be. But yeah, I mean, we think there's just there's other interesting things we can do. And it's not, I guess in my mind, I don't necessarily see it as like, it's just going to be gallery 1, gallery 2, gallery 3, gallery 4. There could just be other, I guess I want to describe it. Just different things that are directionally interesting that aren't just the same thing, cookie cutter, repeated over and over again. And so,
like not taking the same thing that you did with Pace to another, to a museum or to a gallery.
Well, or maybe I would see a museum as a different entity, right? So that's more institutional, commercial space, right? So that could be something, right? That would be interesting to work directly with the museum on what, that kind of partnership would look like. And it's definitely like, I think the things that are going to land there is kind of like what I was describing, that there's this sort of synergy that happens. It's not particularly interesting to just go say, get a partner and just say, okay, here's your space on ArtBlocks release projects. That's not particularly interesting. We feel like we do that pretty well on our own, right? And we have a great set of artists and we do that. So it's something where there's going to be a different sort of like value add sort of in both directions. Like essentially ArtBlocks is opening up space for this partner to have some room to like work with us to release projects, but then there should be something interesting in the other direction. And generally like that's us, like probably finding ways to share what we're doing outside of the Web3 space, I think is probably the primary thing that would happen. So are there exhibition opportunities? Are there, what is it? What new audiences can we bring to the table through these collaborations, through these partnerships? So
I'm so glad you said that, because that's really a mantra of ours. That's why we call this Culture Meets Crypto, because we're trying to think through the lens of, the 2.5 billion gamers, the mass market, art market, or the larger, I guess, markets. And, we'd like to challenge ourselves to educate the traditional worlds to come into these spaces if there's a synergy, and if there's if the collaboration and creativity create something totally new. So it's interesting to hear you just describe all that, because it feels like you're really on the cutting edge of what is new in art. And I would think that a lot of the traditional entities in the art world would be super appreciative of you kind of bringing them along.
And it's like I said, I kind of described this before. It was definitely, it's been a process, and it feels like it's opening up more to curiosity and wanting to understand versus I wish you would go away and let us go about our business, kind of thing. But I do want to, because on this point too, I always try to take care that while we are looking to, sort of expand the audience and scope of like what we're doing at ArtBlocks, I always want to take care that like our existing community is like so precious and dear and like important to us. So it's a double-edged sword for us. So it's kind of like, yes, we want to appeal to some of these other constituencies and be part of that dialogue, but not at the expense of leaving behind or alienating who's currently with us at the moment. So we are always balancing those things too, in terms of our decision-making. So I don't know. I always like to just, it's
so you're crypto first.
We could continue on and just be as successful and just focus on essentially our existing and somewhat expanding base of people that understand crypto, and we'd be content. We have so much fun with our existing community, in our Discord, in our live meetups that we have with people. But what we think we're doing, I guess I'll just speak from the artistic side. I think what we're doing artistically at ArtBlocks, what we're putting into the world with the artists that we're championing and working with, we think should resonate like in a much broader way. This is really, we think what we're doing is really important and really timely and really compelling. And the people who are with us now have the benefit and of being early to this movement, but we see it as something bigger, that this is an art form that's kind of our times, and that we want to share with a lot of people. So
yeah, that's a really important distinction, because crypto native is your core audience, your core community. I'm sure your Discord is full of crypto native people, and that is a really great point. That the next move might be to attract. It might attract some of the traditional world, but they're going to want it. They're
we're not going to pivot. Yeah, we're not going to pivot, right? And say, okay, we've had success in the crypto world. Now we're going to move away from that and say, now we're going to take on the mainstream contemporary art world, and that's just what we're going to do now. We don't think of that as being like the better position from where we are now. We think of it as an expansion, in addition to what we're doing.
Almost like bubbling, like your community bubbles up and might spill into and attract the traditional world, but you're not proactively going out there to try to.
And in the end, they're the ones that's driving our success and our growth. Just to be frank about it, I mean, we would not be doing at all what we are doing today if it weren't for our early community supporting and buying our projects, and so the where we are today as ArtBlocks is a direct result of early adopters in the space getting excited about what we're doing and championing what we're doing. So there's a lot of gratitude there for that.
That's amazing. Okay, well, Jeff, there's a lot of gratitude from us as well for you taking the time to be on Culture Meets Crypto. This has been really, really interesting, and I definitely I'm thinking about ArtBlocks differently than I was at the beginning of this episode. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And what's the best way? Where should we go to follow everything you're saying? Everything your new Twitter or new and expanded Twitter following.
Yes.
Where is that?
So I am on Twitter all the time now. So at Jeff G Davis. That's for me personally, just in terms of like it's kind of a mixture of Jeff Davis art sort of stuff, mixture of ArtBlocks stuff. That's just for me personally, if you want to keep track of what I'm up to. For ArtBlocks, we talked about it, Discord is the place to be. If you just go to at @artblocks_io Twitter, I think there should be a link there to our Discord. That's really where all the conversations go down relative to ArtBlocks. It's a very active and vibrant
I'm so glad you said that, because in every one of the episodes so far, we've talked about Discord, and Discord, we have an investment in Discord. We're big fans of this, the kind of creativity and collaboration. And Micah Johnson, I don't know if you have met him in the past, but he said something at the Christie's Art Conference last year, which was, I've got all these millions of Instagram followers, or I don't know how many there are a lot of them, and it's a one-way street, one-way communication. And he said, but in my Discord, there's collaboration. My collectors are there. I actually iterate and get better with my art based on their commentary and grow as an artist. And it's just, I think that the concept of Discord is something that is I think just now beginning to be understood by the broader world. Outside of
I mean, it's definitely sort of our sort of town hall, for everything that happens at ArtBlocks. It's where all of our announcements, for everything that's going on sort of in real time happen there. But to your point, we have a huge artist community that's kind of inside of ArtBlocks as well. And so that's a really unique development that you don't get in the traditional art world either. Like literally, like you can ask the artist a question about their project and you're probably going to get a response. Like where else does that happen, like in real time? So it's just, it's a really fun, kind of community and place to engage. So, but so thank you for having me. This has been a great, fun conversation. Thanks for letting me, blabber on about all the things that, that I'm interested in and involved in. So I appreciate it.
No, it's very interesting. Thank you so much. And we'll have you back again.
Okay.
We'd love to have you
Sounds
back.
good.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So another one in the book, Seven. That was a great discussion with Jeff Davis. As someone who's always been excited about geometry art, we actually have a couple of pieces in our house by John Higley. I was really drawn to Jeff's work in the very early days of NFTs. I had been searching for a Signum logo for almost a year and loved the idea of using an NFT. So when I found Jeff and his work, it immediately resonated. And the funny thing I didn't even know that this collection was called Logos, that I called him, asked him about. And anyway, it was just a lot of fun to see him. He offered to generate a whole new set of logos that could potentially be our Signum logo, which you can see here on the screen. And this one was the first form that was generated by his algorithm, and it looked like an S, so we went with it.
One of the things, Angie, that really stuck with me after the show was our discussion around different trends in generative art and different artists being brought into ArtBlocks. Because I always knew generative art was made by algorithms, made by code, but I didn't really understand the big variety of the formulas that artists created. And even Jeff, who has a background in math and physics and is a generative artist who works with algorithms, was amazed by MP Cause's Chimera. And he said, geez, I don't know how he coded that. The still lifes that kind of unfurled as you looked at them. So what that showed me is that the formula itself is a form of artistic expression that really only the artists can understand.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We had a great discussion also about the idea that one of a set of things can sometimes be more valuable than a one of one. Even though we all value scarcity, there is a lack of a reference point sometimes for a one of one. If something's the only thing in the world of its kind, without any sort of reference, it's harder to really assign value to that. So generative art seems to provide the best of both worlds, in that it can generate a set in which each piece is both unique and also clearly, fits into the larger set.
Yeah, definitely. Also super interesting to see that, galleries, museums like Pace Gallery is catching on to generative art, and that partnership really shows how ArtBlocks has cemented themselves into the NFT art scene and really the art world as a whole now. I think as more artists are aware of generative art, as more collectors are aware of generative art, we're going to see some really cool applications and maybe even using those formulas that make generative art and applying them to physical goods or even game skins, something like that. It's going to be really cool.
That is going to be very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much, Devin, and look forward to next week.